So this is part of our funding series that we've been putting on. And so some of you may have come to some of our earlier trainings. But the one today, we're going to talk about infrastructure funding opportunities specifically for tribal wastewater systems in Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And I will note this, this work has been done with funding through the US EPA. Okay, so just briefly to go over this program. So this webinar today is part of our tribal wastewater program. And the goal is to assist tribal wastewater systems in EPA Region 6, 7, and 8. And so today all of you are in EPA Region 8, but this is part of a larger program. And the goal is to provide training and technical assistance for you all to prevent prevention, reduction, and elimination of pollution associated with wastewater. And also to help you comply with environmental regulations and to help you build your internal technical, managerial, and financial capacity, sometimes abbreviated as TMF capacity. And one part of that is to help you access public funding, which is what we're going to go over today. And the whole goal of this in the end is to protect both public health and the environment when it comes to wastewater. You can learn more about our website or more about this project through the website, which has the link here. And then you can also use this QR code to get to our program website. And so what we're doing through this program, we're doing numerous things, including needs assessment. So that's where we meet with you and talk about what your specific needs are and can help you evaluate kind of what some of your needs are for whether it's funding or capacity or anything like that. We, of course, provide technical assistance for funding. And I think some of you who are on the call today, we've been helping you directly with funding, trying to find funding that works well for your specific needs. We're also trying to foster these peer-to-peer learning sessions and platforms, because a lot of the times you all are the best resources for each other because you've gone through these specific processes and are more familiar with them in the details, a lot of times more familiar than we are as technical assistance providers. And then also to provide training for funding and capacity building, so which is what we're doing today. So the whole goal is to try to help you all meet your needs. So please let us know if there's anything we can help you with. Okay, so really quick, my name is Tucker Colvin, and here's my email address here. So please feel free to contact me. I'm with the Southwest Environmental Finance Center and have been there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now. And I used to be a drinking water operator. And so I'm with the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, but I'm actually based in Billings, Montana. So I am in EPA Region 8. And so the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, it's a technical assistance provider. And it's similar to some other technical assistance providers like Rural Water or the Communities Unlimited, Midwest Assistance Corporation, some of those. We work with you in similar capacity. And we're at the School of Engineering at the University of New Mexico. So there's our actual building down in Albuquerque. And then on this project is also Wichita State University Environmental Finance Center. And I think we have somebody from there, Daniel, he's with them. And so they're, of course, at Wichita State University, and they're also with the Heartland Environmental Justice Center. And I wanted to point them out too, because even if there's something that you specifically need that maybe me or Matt aren't experts in, we have other partners and maybe they might be more familiar with your specific need. So please feel free to contact us with whatever your needs are, and we can find somebody who can hopefully provide you some assistance. Okay, so the webinar today is about infrastructure funding in Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota, but this is just part of a series. So there's some that we have already done. So we did an overview of wastewater infrastructure funding opportunities for tribal nations, and that one mostly went over federal sources that are available for tribes in every region of the US. And that recording is online. Recently, we had a session on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and our colleague Shannon did that funding, and that's a great webinar, very informative. So if you want more information about that specific funding source, you can view that. And then in the future, we're going to be doing one about managing your grant after the award. But please let us know if there's anything else that you would like a specific webinar on, because the whole goal is to provide information that's useful to you. So feel free to put in the chat if there's anything that's helpful, or you can email us later and provide some more suggestions for things you'd like to learn. Okay, so for today, we're going to do go over the overview and logistics, a lot of which we have already done. And then we're going to talk about some general funding strategies and some information about the different steps along the way. Yeah, thank you, Daniel. See you on the chat. Thanks for putting your contact information in there. And then I'm going to go over first South Dakota specific funding sources, then North Dakota, and then Montana. Okay, so just to go over funding in general really quick. You all filled out that poll about federal funding with all these alphabet soup of acronyms. So just to go over what these are really quick. Probably the one you're all most familiar with is the Indian Health Service Sanitation Deficiency System. And then the other ones too that you may or may not be familiar with is this EPA Clean Water Indian Set-Aside, congressional direct spending, and that's through your individual congressperson or senator. And then the Bureau of Reclamation, or acronym BOR, USDA Rural Development. So that's the United States Department of Agriculture. And then the next one, Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, HUD. This Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, and that's through the EPA. And that's where we did that webinar on that one specifically last session. And then this last one is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or USACE. So that's what those ones all are. And they all provide various programs, various funding for different purposes. But I want to just put all those there. And there's probably other ones too. I think Fish and Wildlife Service has some funding options. So there's a whole number of sources. Okay, and there's two federal sources that I did want to talk about specifically really quick. So the first one is that Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And so this one, it is a federal source, and this is that source that we had the webinar on specifically. And this is a federal funding program, but that money goes through states directly. So in order to apply for this, you have to actually apply through your state agency. And it's a different agency for every state, of course. Usually it's like an environmental agency. And so those are different by every single state, but there's a lot of similarities. And so if you want to learn more about your state, there's a lot of information online, but we're also happy to help you navigate that. And some of the agencies that I'm going to talk about today are actually the same ones that do administer the Clean Water SRF program. And then the one other federal source that I wanted to talk about really quick was these community development block grants from HUD, the Housing and Urban Development. And so HUD, they provide these block grants. They provide them to states as well as tribal governments and municipalities larger than 50,000. And so then states are usually what give out money to smaller communities. So depending on your specific organization, whether your utility, it could be a nonprofit, or maybe you have individual utilities based in specific towns, like a municipality maybe in your reservation. And so depending on what that may be, or maybe where you're operating on more trust land, this could be a source of funding through your state. But that's gonna be really specific with each situation. And then, as I mentioned, every tribal government for federally recognized tribes, they do get a chunk of money as community development block grants from HUD. And so this usually can be used for wastewater, but each tribal government may use this for different things. So if you're not familiar with that, maybe you can talk to tribal government and figure out what that money is generally used for. Okay, so really quick, just to go over the why we're talking about state funding and how this can kind of fit into the picture. So what are kind of why do state funding as opposed to federal funding? And kind of the biggest reason is just based on your individual need. So it depends on what specific projects you're doing, how much money you need for those. And oftentimes it's easier to go for state funding versus federal funding. But of course, with each source, there's pros and cons of each funding source. And those pros and cons, sometimes it can be helpful because these state funds can be used as a match for federal funds. So a lot of times federal funds require a local match, excuse me, and these can be used for those. So you don't have to take money from your general fund or from your rate collections if you collect utility rates. Sometimes these are also smaller amounts, so they can be more convenient if you have a small project and you don't need to go through the whole federal process. And then because of that, they can also be more flexible because you don't have as many like federal requirements or hoops to jump through. And such as like Build America, Buy America, BABA, or even like Davis Bacon Wage Act. And of course, these are all dependent on each fund. So sometimes your state fund may require these. Sometimes they may not. It depends on maybe which state fund. So it's all different depending on what you're applying for. And then a lot of the times these do have a quicker timeline because of the more flexibility and the less requirements. But of course, that's dependent on each fund. Okay, and a lot of the funds today that I'm going to talk about for each state, I try to find as comprehensive as a list as I could. But of course, there's probably options out there that I missed. And that's because some of these funds are one-time programs. So last year, the Montana State Legislature, they passed, it was House Bill 355, and it was called the State Local Infrastructure Partnership Act of 2023. And so this was a one-time appropriation of money set aside by the legislature for water and wastewater systems. And as far as I know, it's not expected to be a yearly thing or a regular thing. And so that specific fund has passed, but there could be more funds that are going to come up in upcoming legislative sessions. So keep your eye out for that. And also keep your eye out for other options that maybe I just missed and are maybe through some agency that you wouldn't expect would provide funds for water and wastewater, but they're out there. Okay, and then just to give you a few sources of where I found a lot of this information. So the Southwest Environmental Finance Center is part of the Environmental Finance Center Network. And we have our sister partner organizations all over the country for different EPA regions, but collectively we are the Environmental Finance Center Network. And on our website, we have these funding tables. So you can click on every state and find funds for water and wastewater systems for those states, as well as there's one specifically for tribal water and wastewater funding. So you'll see that there. And these are updated regularly, but of course they are not always comprehensive. So there's things that may be missing from these. And then each state has a guide that they usually publish. So this is the one for North Dakota. And this is put together by the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality, as well as the Rural Water Systems Association in North Dakota. So there's that link there that you can refer to. There's also a similar one for South Dakota, and this one was put together by the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and there's a link for that one. And then in Montana, the only one I could find was most updated in 2020, but this is a list of funding sources put together by the Montana Legislative Fiscal Division. So these are some sources. Of course, a lot of these are just, you can find them going on agency websites or searching them. So there's lots of options out there. Okay, and kind of thinking about steps along the way. Because a lot of the funds that are available and how I organize them in these slides, there's a lot that are specifically for planning and then design and construction. So when you think about the path along the infrastructure funding and construction and all that, the first step is really to identify needs. And so that's really what the utility does. So these are what you see day to day. You work in the field, you know what's going on. And if you don't, maybe the operators do, because maybe you're more of an administrative person. And so those are identified usually by the utility, but also we're happy to help you try to identify those needs through those needs assessment that I discussed at the beginning. So we can help you with that. But then the next step is planning. So you figure out what your need is, and then you want to plan for potential solutions to that. And this planning step usually involves a preliminary engineering report or maybe a technical memo or something like that. And so this really lays out, it identifies a problem, and then it proposes various solutions to that. And so then after you decide on what you want your solution to be, then it goes to the design phase. And so an engineer usually does this. And so this is going to be designing that specific infrastructure to fix your specific need. And then, of course, then it goes to construction. And then that's a contractor that does that work. And so there's funds for all these various stages. Not necessarily the needs stage, because that one is, as you all know your needs more than anyone. But there's a lot of funds that are specifically for planning. But then oftentimes design and construction are the same funding application. And they can be included in one application a lot of the time, but they don't necessarily have to be. You can apply for funding for just a design, and then an engineer will design your whatever that new infrastructure is that you need. And sometimes that's helpful because then you can apply for specific construction funding. And if you have a construction project that is already ready to go, and it's already designed, sometimes it's easier to get funding for that. So that can be a strategy. Okay, so now I'm going to go into specific funding. And I'm going to start with South Dakota. So just to start, so most of the funding for wastewater systems in South Dakota comes through the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And so I first want to start with this planning grant. So this one is called the Small Community Planning Grant. And this is for planning and engineering, of course. And this is specifically for communities with a population of less than 2,500 people. And so I know a lot of you represent a tribal nation here today. So it's likely that maybe your total population is greater than this 2,500, or some of the other, if you're not in South Dakota, some of the other states have similar or different numbers. But it might be dependent on that specific system. So just know that it doesn't necessarily count you out. And this is for any government entity or nonprofit organization. And so with this one, how this fund works, it reimburses you up to 80% of the cost for that planning, for that preliminary engineering report or whatever you're getting done. But it does have a maximum of $10,000, which isn't a ton of money, but it's more than zero. And then these are awarded throughout the year. And then here's the website for this. So for all of these funding sources I'm going to go over, I will include the link for either the application itself or for the website that gives you more information. Okay, and now going on to projects. So the actual project fund through this source is the Sanitary and Storm Sewer project funding. And this is part of the larger Consolidated Water Facilities Construction Program that you may have heard of. And this is the funding is based on allocations based on the legislature, each legislative session. And these can be grants, loans, or a combination of the two. And so how this works is you first have to apply to be listed on the State Water Facilities Plan. And for that, the applications are due on October 1st. But if it's an emergency situation, the applications are accepted quarterly. And so the State Water Facilities Plan, so this is a big list that the state puts together, and it has a list of fundable projects on it. And so that's the first step. But then even after you're on this list, then you have to actually apply for the specific, you have to submit your funding application to be funded, even though you're already on that list. And with that, you have to also include preliminary engineering report with that. So hopefully you already have that done and maybe use the other project for that purpose. And then, sometimes it could be a challenge with tribal utilities is with the rate requirement. So this one does come with a minimum utility rate. And there's the website for that one. And this funding option, it does have a specific portion for small water facilities, still part of the same program, but this is for projects specifically less than $250,000, or if they're not eligible for Clean Water State Revolving Fund, because there's some federal requirements that come along with that. So, because this is the same agency that runs that program. And it just can be easier because there's less requirements for projects that are greater than 250,000. And there's a website for that. Okay, then in South Dakota, there's also funding through the Governor's Office of Economic Development. And that program is called the Local Infrastructure Improvement Fund. So these are grants for public infrastructure associated with an economic development project. And I don't know exactly how they define that, but I think that could be pretty broad. And tribal governments are specifically listed in this as an eligible entity. And this has a quarterly application cycle. And it really has a big range of awards. So go down to $9,000 all the way up to $500,000 for recent awards. And here's that website. And for this application, I think you do have to contact them directly, which I will say is generally a good practice no matter what. If you're applying for a fund, to usually contact them and they can help you throughout the process. Okay, and then lastly, for South Dakota, there's this through the same department, there is the Economic Development Partnership Program. I'll go through this one really quick because this one, it seems it's either very underutilized or it is not, or they don't have much funding. So this program provides matching grants to assist in funding equipment and training needs, new staff, or to elevate existing part-time staff for the purpose of developing or expanding local and community economic development programs. So I want to put that quote in there directly just because it's pretty encompassing. And this one does include tribal governments as specific eligible entities. And this one is interesting because there's even some awards I saw that were for a couple $100, and then some that went all the way up to the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So huge range in awards here. But really, it's very seldomly used, and I'm not sure exactly the reason why. I suggest contacting them if you're interested in this and seeing what the current status of this is. In the last few years, there's only about $4,000 in total awards. But in the past more than 4 years ago, there was a lot more awards, up to over $1 million per year for this program. So it could be a potential option. And here's that website. Okay, and so that was South Dakota. And so now I'm going to jump into North Dakota. So please, as we go along, please stop and let us know if you have any experience with these funding sources, because I think those of you who are on here now are in North Dakota or Montana. So please add to the conversation because you are all the experts in this. We have a good overview or good understanding of the overview of these programs, but you and as well as the agencies are really the experts in going through these programs. Okay, so to start with North Dakota. So to start with planning grants, the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality, they have a program called the Planning Assistance Reimbursement Grant. And I think I mentioned it before, but a lot of these grants are actually reimbursement. So you will pay for them up front and then the agency will reimburse you at the end. But this one has reimbursement specifically in the name, but I did want to point that out. So the point of this is to assist communities prepare an engineering report. So usually a PER, preliminary engineering report. And this one, similar to the one in South Dakota, it reimburses 80% of the cost, but up to $15,000. However, it can be more than $15,000 if you are a wastewater system and your report includes video inspection. So if you include the closed circuit television of put in the scope down the sewer lines to inspect them, it can be more than $15,000, although it doesn't actually specify what that amount, what that maximum is if it includes that. So, but just know that it could be more. Okay, and the eligibility for that one is a political subdivision with a population of 2,500 people or less. So again, if you're questioning whether if this counts for you, reach out to them, and they do even say that they do consider larger communities on a case-by-case basis. In order to be eligible, you also have to be eligible to borrow from that SRF, the State Revolving Loan Fund program. And so those requirements are on that website. But if you want to apply for this one, you can contact the department directly. And there's that contact information there. Okay, and then another source of funding in North Dakota is the Bank of North Dakota, and this is a publicly owned bank. And their program is the Infrastructure Revolving Loan Fund. So in order to apply for this one, you first have to demonstrate that you have tried accessing other state and federal programs first. And then they also have a maximum combined total of $20 million, and that's per entity. So if you're a utility or the tribal government or whatever your entity is, which is a decent amount of money for sure. And these are loans, not grants. So they do have a 2% fixed interest rate. And their maximum loan term is 30 years or the useful life of a project. So maybe you're using this money for something that has a useful life of less than 30 years. Then the maximum term for that is whatever that expected time frame is, that useful life. And there's the website for that one. The North Dakota Public Finance Authority also has a financing program called their Capital Financing Program. They provide loans for political subdivisions. And this really is any amount that you are able to demonstrate that you're able to repay. So they don't have a stated maximum there. And how this works, the interest rate is set based on a bid process. So the Public Finance Authority, they sell their own bonds, and then through that bid process, that is what determines the interest rate that you will pay as a utility. So the nice thing about it is that you get to use their rating. I think it's like a AA minus bond rating. And that's what sets your interest rates, which oftentimes is better than you would be able to do independently. So that can be a pretty a good option if you're looking for a loan. And there's the website with more information on that one. And then with North Dakota, this isn't a state-specific funding program, but it's a program that North Dakota is a part of, along with maybe 10 other states, which Montana and South Dakota are not part of. And this is called the Rural Water Financing Agency. And they have a couple programs I'll go over really quick. So the first one is this interim program. And the purpose of this is really just to bridge that gap between the time frame of when you are awarded federal funding through like the SRF program or through USDA rural development. And so they give you that money in a quicker time frame than the federal funds would come through. And so then once you get those federal funds, you use those to repay this agency. So that's the purpose of that fund. And there's that website. And then they also have another program called the Flex Term program. And so this is a loan program that's just its own loan program. And they provide loans with 1 to 30-year loan terms. Kind of the purpose of it is they want to prioritize the ease and speed of getting you funding. And how this works is they pool all of these projects and they are able to get a better like bond rating and than you would be individually. So so it's a lower interest rate than you would normally get by pooling all these different utilities together. And it's actually financed through the Kentucky Rural Water Finance Corporation. So they're the ones that you'd actually work with. But that is the website. The Rural Water Finance Agency is kind of who it starts with. So kind of an interesting, kind of unique option there for North Dakota. Okay. Okay, I've been talking a lot, so hope you're all still awake. Okay, and so last, I'm going to go through Montana specific funding sources. So Montana has, it's interesting because there's two different main funding entities in Montana for state water and wastewater funding. The first one is the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, or DNRC, and they have a program called the Renewable Resources Grant and Loan Program. And then the Department of Commerce, they have a program that is called the Montana Coal Endowment Program, which is formerly called the Treasure State Endowment Program. So maybe you're familiar with that name. And so these are two separate funding sources, but they have a lot of similarities. So both of these, with the exception of the emergency funds that they have, the application process, you apply, and it's actually the same form, the same application for both programs for the actual project funds. And so you do that one form, and you can apply it to both funds through that form, and then that list goes to the legislature, and then the legislature approves that fund. And so because it has to be approved by the legislature, it's a 2-year cycle. And so sometimes that can be kind of inconvenient if you need funds now. And unfortunately, this upcoming legislative session is coming up pretty quick. And so the application window for your project to be approved through this upcoming legislative session has already closed. But now is a good time to start thinking about the next legislative session coming up in 2027. So that was a time to start thinking about what you need to kind of compile and what your needs are, and then you can get everything ready for the next cycle. Oh yeah, and the name of that is called the Uniform Application for Montana Public Facilities Project. And I'll have a link to where you can find that later. Okay, so we're going to start out with the DNRC programs. They have a planning grant. And so eligible applicants for this one, it does specifically mention tribal governments. And this can be used for all kinds of things. Preliminary engineering reports, like I've talked about a lot. And then all these other things like technical narrative, your capital improvement plan, a growth plan, sample conditions. It can also be used for surveying or just other studies, whatever that may be, whatever your need is. So it seems like a pretty adaptable funding source for your planning needs. And the amount for this one, it varies depending on what you're using it for. So for a PER, they pay up to $40,000. And that's for like a wastewater PER. You can see there's other things that people or that other entities can use this for, such as irrigation. And so then there's a technical narrative, which can be similar to a PER, but usually a bit shorter. Although some of you probably know more than I do. And so they even have a fund too, so $20,000 for specifically for a PER or technical narrative update. So usually PERs are valid for, I think, 5 years. So after that, you'll probably have to pay an engineer to update it. So this can be a good option for that. And then, yeah, there's some other funds for various other things that you can also use this for various amounts. The nice thing about this compared to North Dakota and South Dakota is there's no match requirement. So that's pretty nice. So you can just get this money. You don't have to do that 20% match. And here's that website. And the other nice thing about this program is they provide technical assistance for you to apply for this planning grant. So the DNRC has contracted with technical assistance providers. So these, I think these are engineers throughout Montana, and they will actually help you fill out the application. And they'll provide up to $3,000 or 20 hours for that contractor to help you with the application to get this planning done. So I think that could be really helpful with starting out this whole process. Okay, and now moving on to project grants. So this is the DNRC's project grant. As an eligible entity, tribal governments are specifically mentioned in there. And this one also has no match, which can be very convenient, although there is a $125,000 maximum, which for construction isn't a whole ton of money, but hopefully it can be used to leverage other money as a match. So it can be $125,000, still a decent amount. And so for this one, the application is you apply through DNRC with that uniform application that I mentioned, and then they recommend all these projects to the governor's office, and then after that it goes to the legislature, and then the financing is approved or the funding is approved through the legislature. So it's a 2-year cycle. And here is the website for that grant. And they do also have the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, DNRC. They have a non-point source grant for non-point source pollution. And this can be utilized by wastewater systems to eliminate individual septic systems and to connect houses or buildings to a centralized municipal sewer system. And so through this grant, you have to actually eliminate those septic systems and reclaim them after the septic system's eliminated. And the money that is awarded to a government entity, it must be directly used to offset or eliminate the cost that an individual homeowner would have to pay to connect to a municipal centralized sewer system. And then these can also be applied for as through nonprofits. So if it's a private entity, or yeah, I guess even private entities, there's a match requirement of 50% of that total project costs. Oops. Oh yeah, and then lastly too, there is priority for these projects if they demonstrate a risk to state waters. And then, as I mentioned, government entities can apply, but entities can also sponsor non-government entities to do that work, like I just mentioned in the last slide. So even private or nonprofits can apply for this as long as they're sponsored by a governmental entity. And for this in total, there's a $100,000 maximum or $5,000 per connections for those septic systems to be removed and connected to the sewer. And there's a website for that one. Okay, there's also public loans, and this is similar to their grant program. So these are all the eligible entities that are listed. And this is similar to the grant program, similar application. But the amount that they're able to loan you is dependent on your bonded debt capacity. So, and then these interest rates, they're set by the legislature, and they're dependent on that whole severance bond rate. So still, it's probably a better rate than you'd be able to get independently, hopefully. And then this is a variable term loan with a 20-year limit. And there's a website for that specific program. Okay, lastly, through the DNRC, they have emergency grants. So these are, of course, if you can't wait until the next legislative cycle to apply through the normal project fund. So tribal governments are specifically mentioned in this one. And this one, it has $10,000 to $30,000 maximum, and they depend then on severity and need. And there's a kind of like a rubric that determines if it's 10,000, 20,000, or 30,000 amount. So, which still isn't a whole ton of money depending on what it is, but this could be something that's really helpful if you need a new like lift station pump or something like that. This could be helpful. And for this program, to apply, you actually first just get in contact with DNRC staff, and then they send out an engineer to assess the situation. And then they try to make funding available pretty quickly, and usually it's within a month and a half to 2 months. And there's a website for that one. Okay, and similar to their emergency grants, they also have emergency loans. And here's the eligible entities that they list for that one. But this, other like the grant, they have no stated maximum amount. So if you have a bigger problem and need some emergency loans, this could be helpful. And it's the same process. You first contact the NRC staff, they send out an engineer, and then they make that a funding available pretty quickly. And there's the website. Okay, now shifting a little bit, and sorry, we're getting close to being done. I know some of this can be kind of dry going through specific funds, but hopefully it's useful as a resource for you all. Okay, so the Department of Commerce, through their Montana Coal Endowment Program, they also have a planning grant program. And like I said, this whole program was formerly called the Treasure State Endowment Program. I think they only changed it in the last couple of years, so maybe you are familiar with that one. And this specifically, they mentioned preliminary engineering reports for this one, capital improvement plans, and then tribal governments are listed specifically in this program. This one has a $40,000 maximum with a minimum match of 20% of the total project cost. So that means they'll pay up to 80%, and then you have to pitch in at least 20% of that. And there's the application for that one and a website for more information. And then they have the project grant, which I mentioned. It's that same application, also formerly called the Treasure State Endowment Program. And this one, it can be used for a project, but it actually can also be used for engineering and design. So you can potentially, if you need some engineering done or like a PER done or something, and it might cost more than the $40,000, you can consider applying for this fund to pay for that. And eligible entities, tribal governments are included in this. And this one, a pretty big maximum of 750,000, potentially less though, and that's all dependent on user rates, because there's a 100% match. So you have to match whatever they give you dollar for dollar. So they want to make sure that you are able to provide that dollar for dollar match. And there's a website for this one. Okay, and then the Montana Coal Board Planning and Project Grants. So this is an interesting program. I'll briefly go over this one because this provides planning and projects for communities that are specifically affected by either an increase or a decrease in coal development or coal use. So this may apply for some of you on the call today. So, but there's more information at that website there. Okay, and they also provide emergency grants, the Montana Coal Endowment Program. And so this is a 2-year cycle as well. And then money is put into this program by the legislature each session. So that's every 2 years. And they historically have put in $100,000 each of those 2 years. So not a whole ton of money in there, but it could come in handy. And then money is available every 2 years until that pot of money is all used up. And there's a $30,000 maximum per project for that. So just like the other emergency fund, this could be helpful for something pretty simple, like maybe you need some new pumps or something like that. Could be handy. And then there's a website for that. Okay, and we did it. We went through all those. So hopefully you got something from that overview of all the different funding sources. So I would say as a takeaway, there's lots of options out there. So you may be more familiar with the federal options and use those and rely on IHS or maybe some EPA money. But just know there's a lot of state options, and those can actually really help you leverage that federal money so you don't have to use as much money from your local funds or your ratepayers if you have that. And there's tons of other creative options out there. So depending on what your specific needs are. So please contact us. We can help you navigate the specifics of your situation and what funding options there are out there.